Hi, my name is Laurie McLean, and I'm a registered dietitian working with 4 Arrows. I have been invited to help out with some of the educational piece regarding nutrition, and it's for a 90-day challenge, weight challenge that the 4 Arrows has on in their communities and in their staff here in Winnipeg. And one big key thing I want to say is that, you know, whether or not you're the winner or anything of these types of challenges, one of the things the challenges do, and what I like sometimes about the challenges, is it gets individuals thinking about how much they're eating, what they're eating. It motivates them to get active. I've talked to a lot of people already that said they're doing a lot more walking. And you know what, it's an individual thing. And in the end, if maybe you don't come to the end and you don't win, but you've made changes and your blood pressure's coming down and your blood fat levels are coming down and you've got yourself off the pop and you're drinking water or you're making healthy changes like that, you're a success. You've done a success. And that's why we want to keep that. And I hope that we can continue in terms of looking at maintenance and continuing this further even after the 3 months. Because it'd be nice to see how people continue to make these changes, because changing any kind of habit that we've had for years is very, very difficult, very, very challenging. And there's going to be times when we fall off and we're going to have to pick up and get back. And it's staying motivated is a huge, huge thing that we want to focus on, is what will motivate us to stay on track, and what's the kind of the cues on that. So anyway, but thank you for coming and listening to the sessions for the day. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the impact of stress and how it could be impacting your success in losing the weight, in maintaining the weight, so you don't gain any more down the road. And then some suggestions or some ideas of things to think about. When we look at stress, okay, what are some kind of stresses that a lot of us go through? Every one of us experience it in a different way, in different amounts. So how stress affects our body from one person to the next is going to be quite different. How someone copes with the stress is going to be a key factor on how it is going to even cause health changes or other problems. So we want to take a look at stress now. Some of the stresses that we have in our life, and this is just the start of so many different things. Relationships can be stressful. Families. In the small communities, many of you are in housing, very cramped housing, a lot of people in the same house. That can create stress. Family stresses, okay? It could be your daughter, it could be your son having difficulty, it could be somebody with an illness that's creating a lot of extra stress, a lot of pressure on the rest of the family, on yourself. Work stresses, workplace stresses. These are things that are, you know, if somebody tells me that they don't have stress, I really have to question, because everybody experiences stress in their life, and there's a lot of different things that, you know, there'll be times when our life might be less stressful, and then there might be things that happen. We might have a loss, we might be grieving, then suddenly the stress comes back. It might be this long winter. This long winter has done a number on a lot of people, okay? This snow, and especially those who are suffering from things like arthritis. The pain has been greater for a lot of people. This is a stress. All of these are stresses that our body will take on, and it can be influence from the environment, it can be influence from a lot of things. Infections, if you get an infection, a flu or a cold, if you get any injuries, okay, or if you've had any trauma, you might be in a car accident, it could be anything, or you might have fallen and you might have broken your hip, or you might have broken a wrist. Any of these creates a stress. And one of the ones that I've highlighted here is I've put a star beside exhaustion, and this is where we're going to get into talking about how sleep, okay, can create this lack of sleep, can cause this exhaustion if you're run down and tired all the time, or your blood sugars are over 10. And why I want to mention this, for those with diabetes, one of the biggest things you've got to do is to start monitoring. And when you check your blood sugars, remember, don't be checking them on the ends of your fingers. I still see people doing that. That's where your nerves are. That's going to create pain. That's going to hurt. And it's going to cause the splitting in the ends of your fingers. Always, you'd milk your finger and on the side of your pad of your finger, on the side. That's not, because the nerves, most of the nerves in your finger are on the tips. You don't want to be doing your blood sugar checks in the ends. And so you don't want to create more pain and more sore fingers. All of that is not going to help because it's actually going to make your blood sugars go higher. So anything like this, and those with diabetes also will find that when they're really sick, if they catch a flu, they'll notice their sugars might go from, you say it's usually around 8.5, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're up around 13, 16, 18. They're wondering what's going on. Well, this is what's happening in our body. And whether you have diabetes or not, this is how our body reacts to stress. So we go through all these stresses in our body, and these stresses cause the release of stress hormones. And one in particular is called cortisol. And it's released from what we call our adrenal glands. Now, here's our kidneys. Here's our kidneys here. Okay? And our urinary bladder and all that other stuff. But right up above our kidneys are these things called adrenal glands. And it makes also other stress hormones called adrenaline. So adrenaline, you hear about when somebody's scared or frightened, or let's say you're driving, you almost hit a deer, and you're like this, you look like a deer in a headlight for the next 10 kilometers because the stress of almost hitting and having an accident, you're on the alert. Okay, so our stress hormone, we have stress hormones that are there to put us on alert. We need our stress hormones. Sometimes they're there to help us. But when we're constantly stressed, day in, day out, all the time, this is when it starts to take a toll on our health. And one of the areas is often our weight, and it can put a big stress on that. And if it's diabetes, it's blood sugar control. It can take a stress on, it can take it can have a big effect on it, and also our heart and our blood pressure. It can really start to affect our health. So here we're going through these stresses. Then these stresses cause a release of these things called stress hormones. And what these stress hormones do, okay, and the way our body is set up is that, let's say you fasted for 3 or 4 days. Do you notice that after not eating for 3 or 4 days, let's say you were sick and you're throwing up, have you noticed that you didn't die? You're still around? And that, like, you haven't eaten for 4 days. So where was I getting my food from? Where did my glucose come from? Like, how come I didn't go into low blood sugars and go into a coma? How come that didn't happen? You know, because your body has a backup system, okay? And it's like if the power went out at the nursing station back in the community, what kicks in? You got this backup generator. If you go out on a skidoo trip, okay, you take along that extra spare tank. So let's say you run out of all of your fuel in your tank and you fill up that spare. That spare is to help get you there, get you home. Well, in our body, we have a jerry can, a backup fuel tank. And it's found in our liver. And this little jerry can is like that little spare gas tank, okay? It's in something called glycogen stores, okay? Little pockets of glycogen stores inside our liver. And it's made up of backup fuel or glucose. Remember our food or that fuel for the body of our body is glucose? This is where our body will pocket it, okay? And have backup, and it's called glycogen. And it's a backup fuel or glucose when the body is stressed. So the liver, what will happen then? Okay, so we got these little pockets of glucose. So your body senses, okay, I'm stressed. It gets a message to the brain, and there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Okay, it's just above. I won't bother drawing the picture, but it's a part of our brain, and that part of the brain goes, okay, I'm getting a signal that we're stressed. Something's stressing it. That person's sugar's at 13. This person's coming down with a cold. We got to help that person. Now, what the liver doesn't know is what is your blood sugars already. So if somebody with diabetes already had sugars over 10, let's say they were 14 or 15, liver doesn't know that. What happens is, in our body, what it does, the stress hormones will stimulate the liver to empty that jerry can. to release and drop and send that glucose. So liver is stimulated by the stress hormones to release the glucose or sugar into the blood from its little stores, little cans. So here's our blood sugar. It already had a lot there. So then we just told our liver, or is getting the message, because you're stressed. Okay, you might be stressed over, maybe you're angry because you just had a fight with someone in your family. Maybe you're scared. You're really frightened for someone. You're so frightened. Anything like that can trigger this stress hormone to tell the liver, okay, we're going to need more fuel. We need more glucose to get through this stress. So what does your liver do? It starts to dump more glucose. So I'll put this is coming from the liver, the square box ones. So the liver dumps more glucose. So suddenly, now why I want to explain this is I had clients for a number of years, and until we started to realize what was going on, many of them would come in and they're struggling with weight. They've had struggles with weight for a long time. And they'd say, I'm hardly eating. And they'd come in with these food records that would show that they're not overeating. They were well within the amount that they're supposed to have. They're eating beautiful. They're eating according to Canada's Food Guide. They were doing everything right, and they weren't losing that weight. And so then you start to find out, gee, they're struggling with a son that might have schizophrenia, and there's a lot of worries, a lot of stress. Then you find out that they're still struggling with a loss of somebody, or still struggling with other things. Maybe they have arthritis and they've got a lot of pain. And what people don't realize is that people can gain weight. You can gain the weight even through stress, because this is what happens. Now, look at this happen. With all that stress hormones dumping that extra sugar, you didn't need all of that, right? There's way too much. Remember we talked about that driving around town with a gas tank and that little quarter tank left? After your muscles, your nerves, and everything took what it needed. And we did that in that other diagram where here it is and we used up what it needed. But what happens is, what stress will do is it will dump more in. Another factor is when people are stressed. People react to stress two different ways. But the majority, when they're stressed, will have a tendency to eat more if they're depressed or they're down. So if they do this, then you've got an increase of glucose from the food. So this goes up even more. So there's even more going in. But even if they were not eating more food, if they were eating the right amounts, stress will cause this increase. So now you're back to square one. What happens with all this extra sugar? Now your sugar's full of all this extra blood sugar you didn't need. You didn't need all this blood sugar. So what your body's going to do, it's not going to leave that sugar in the blood. It's going to say, we got to clear this the sugar out of the blood. It's too high. We got to clear it out. So the message is going to get to the brain, and the brain's going to say to the pancreas, okay, we got to get this sugar out. We got to get that sugar down. It's too high. So the pancreas sends in the insulin, okay, and it helps that sugar get to the liver. The liver takes all that excess sugar and turns it into a very bad fat called triglyceride. And away it goes. It gets stored as fat. So all this extra sugar that's caused from the stress goes back to the liver, and the liver turns it into fat cell. And that's where we start to get an increase of weight, just with having difficulty with stresses, things that are going on in our lives. And that's why we have to be so, so careful. For some people with diabetes and some people with other conditions called polycystic ovarian syndrome, or there may be someone that has schizophrenia and they're on certain medications. There are certain medications and there's certain others. It's not just those with diabetes. Sometimes you are put on a medication called metformin. And the reason why the doctor, if he checks it and he says, okay, this person's liver is fine, I think we can use metformin. What will happen is, this is not a weight loss medication. What this job of this medication is that it tells the liver to stop releasing it. Don't release this sugar. it actually works on your liver to stop it from doing this. Because the doctors know that some of you might be struggling with your sugars at 13, 14. So by having the metformin, it's preventing you from doing an excessive weight gain. So it's actually protecting you from gaining up more weight. A few years ago, we didn't have metformin, we just had glyburide. And the thing about glyburide is its job is to tell that pancreas, make more insulin. So it's like your pancreas is like a battery. And let's say the battery's running out of juice and it's having trouble keeping up the power. So what that glyburide or that diabetes does, it says, come on pancreas, make more insulin, make more insulin. So the pancreas would make more insulin, send it in, and the sugars would come down. But what we found is, as we mentioned before, when it stimulated that pancreas and there was an influx of that insulin, we noticed people's appetite went up. Remember we talked about the leptin and the hormone getting blocked that says I'm full? And what we find is when they were just on the diabetes or the glyburide alone, it was always a struggle. Very rarely do we see someone successful in losing the weight until we got the metformin, because we realized it was something happening internally with our liver that was dumping that extra fuel. It thinks it's helping us. So when we're sick, it's thinking it's giving us more energy to help us through our sick days. But instead, for some, it was actually making things worse. But the liver doesn't know what our blood sugar is. It doesn't know what it's supposed to be. It just dumps. When it gets the message from the stress hormones, dump, dump. Now, what I want to explain is now, this is an area when you're doing this program and this challenge, it's looking at what kind of things have been stressing you. What kind of things have been things that do stress you? And it's coming up now with the strategies on how to cope with those stresses. Everybody's way of coping with stress is quite different, okay? Everybody's level of stress is quite different too. Some of you are going through tremendous stresses. I admire some of the community members. And one of the things I'll be talking about is one thing that's just beautiful out in the small communities is, and I've seen this as a very healthy coping mechanism for stress, has been your humor. The humor has been a big thing that has helped people get through tremendous stresses one after the other, one after the other. Some people barely get their feet on the ground and then something else happens. And this is where it's taking a look at what are the things that have really or are creating you stress. Now, and I'm talking stresses that seem to be on a daily basis, okay? There's other stresses that we might get cold, flu, when it's over, that stress is over. We're in an accident, our injuries heal, we're doing fine now, our stress of that one is over. There's ones like that, but if there's ones that are hanging on, another big one here I want to put on here is financial stress, okay? And so then you'd have to start taking a look at some of these. What are some of the things that could be causing? Some of these things you might not be able to do anything about right now, like the housing situation, because there is such a shortage. But what is it about the housing? Are you getting just quiet time? Maybe quiet time with your spouse, relationships. Are you getting time with just your family? Is there 3 families in one house? You know, these are things that maybe we need to just take my family and go for a picnic and have our time as a family. And it's looking at these things, like what can I do? Maybe, maybe we as a family will go out together, we'll go for a camp. We'll plan to go camping as soon as the weather gets nice. And let's plan a camp trip or go fishing. Politics, okay? And it's looking at if there's individuals that the moment you walk away from them, you're stressed. They always seem to have a negative influence. It's starting to say, okay, I'm going to meet with them because this is my brother. I can't tell my brother I don't want to see him again. But this brother stresses me, for example. I'm just going to use an example here. You might have to say, okay, I'm going to plan to meet with my friend after, and I'm going to tell him at 2 o'clock, and I'll meet my brother at 12, and I'll give him till, at 12:30, we'll have a lunch, and I'll tell him I have to go. You might have to look at planning and limiting the time around people that stress you a lot, that you find that it takes you a while to wind down. It's finding what works for you, and it's you know, there's a lot of things on the internet. There's a lot of things with the heart and stroke. They have a great little booklet on coping skills for stress and stuff. But it really makes a difference, is trying to figure out what will help you deal with your stress. Because when you find ways of coping, and the sooner you cope with the stresses, then this stops the release of these stress hormones. The key is to stop these stress hormones. We don't want the stress to cause you to release stress hormone. This is what we want to do. We want to shut it down right here, so it doesn't even go to the liver. And when your blood sugars are walking around 10, and maybe you haven't been taking your meds, haven't been exercising, you're sneaking that regular pop, you're having that extra cookie or that extra 3 slices of Bannock, that could be causing those blood sugars to go up. So you need to figure out, okay, what can I do to help bring down these stresses? And then from there, see what will work. Now, I will show you some things that have helped. Exercise, or what we call physical activity. You do not This does not mean you have to go out and get a Jane Fonda outfit and start jogging and doing aerobics, okay? One of the things that makes people feel good, and with spring coming, is spring cleaning up the yard. Get the whole family out. Get out there. Haul those woods out of the way. Get rid of the rotten wood. Get the pile stacked. Go out and get some firewood. Doing those kind of things, whatever you're going to need for the summer. Go through each room in the house. Start scrubbing the floor. Now, don't use the Swiffers where you're just shoving it against the cracks, okay? Get down and scrub the floor. Scrub the walls. Clean your dishes. You know how good you feel when your house is looking spotless? Have you ever, you kind of walk around your house and go, oh, I feel so good? Okay? But you've been physically active. You are moving. And when you're moving, as we talked about here, see these muscles you've been moving? Because you scrubbed the walls, you've been down on the floor doing the floors, you're doing the cupboards, your place is looking great. Your muscles are glucose guzzlers. So all this sugar that you'd add is going this way to your muscles. And it's not going to go this way to your liver and turn into fat. And in fact, the more you start exercising, the more you're doing it, these muscles get really greedy. The more muscle you get, the greedier they get. And they're going to start taking your stores of fat back to your liver, and it's going to take that sugar from the fat stores to your heart to keep it going, your brain, and to your muscles, okay? To keep those muscles and get the muscles stronger. So you start to feel so much better. So the more you stay active on your program, the more you're doing muscle exercises, or if you're doing any kind of exercise, even while you're sitting, okay, at home, on the edge of a chair, do some weights, have some soup cans there. Anytime you're moving, you're requesting, your muscles are requesting more glucose, and it's pulling it out of the blood, so less gets stored as fat. You see? So every time you're active, but your environment, being in a nice clean house and your kitchen is spotless, you feel good, that's because exercise, physical activity like housework, yard work, releases what we call feel-good chemicals. And these chemicals are called, and some of you might have heard of them, endorphins. And what they do is they shut down the stress hormones. So if you're going through the tough time, I know sometimes you're in a down, you're feeling depressed, you're dealing with a lot of pressure at work, you've got 15 million things coming at you, you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed. Sometimes what you need to one of the things you might need to do is just go for a nice walk. Go for a nice quiet walk. Might go out to the lake, just sit on the edge of the lake. You might want to go and work out if there's a workout place in your community. Some of the communities have little gyms. Go to the gym. Call up a friend and go for a walk. Sometimes, how many of you have ever felt your friend says, oh, come on, let's go for a walk, and you're going, I don't feel like it. And then you said, oh, okay, and they convinced you, and then you come back from the walk and you feel so good, and you're so glad you went on that walk. Well, why you're feeling so good is the endorphins. You released endorphins, and they shut down the stress. So This is one of the biggest things we find will help. And it also helps in getting those blood sugars down for those with diabetes. Second thing, rest. If you're sick, if you're run down, you should be getting, okay, a minimum of 7 to 9 hours sleep a day. Now, everybody's sleep pattern is different. If you're only getting 5 or 6 at night, but you sometimes take a half an hour cat nap here and there, you maybe after work, you have a half an hour sleep on the couch, or another half an hour in the morning, or let's say you take an extra 10 minutes in the middle of the evening, and then you don't go to bed till 12, and then you're getting up at 6 or 7. Getting about 7 to 9 hours is a huge factor. And I'm going to talk about this after, about how it also has an impact. Actually, I'll do it right now. Is lack of sleep. If you have a lack of sleep, this can also cause your weight gain, okay? What they've noticed is, if you ever notice, our body is a kind of a cycle, okay? Here's breakfast, lunch, there's about 4 hours here, right? Then supper, it can be anywhere between 4 to 6 hours between that. Our body goes in a cycle. So let's say we have 8 o'clock, 12 noon. This might be 4 to 6 o'clock. And then around here, around 10 o'clock to 12, this is where our body gets into cycles. And they may start to trigger getting hungry again. And one of the things you need to do is to find out what time at night, okay, when you're staying up a little later, what time at night do you feel like you got to go through the kitchen and look for food? Okay, mark when you last ate your meal, what time do you have supper, and when are you hungry again in the evening? Because then you know that's going to be your body going into a cycle, trigger. What we find, if you start staying up late at night, okay, remember we talked about anything you eat late at night, your body doesn't really need it. It's taken what it needed. So your muscles, your nerves, the rest of your body, they don't need a lot of glucose. So basically a lot of the stuff that you do eat at night is going to end up as triglycerides, stored as fat. So by the morning, anything you're eating after like 8 or 9 at night, for sure, unless you're active all night, is going to end up as fat in the morning, in triglycerides. But what they've noticed is, with a lack of sleep, for some reason, if you're getting into staying up late and not enough rest, it seems to increase ghrelin, which increases your appetite. For some reason, they are finding that there's an increase in the ghrelin hormone that starts. And that's why some people start to get these hungers, these hungry feelings, and it might be around 12 midnight, and then they'll start getting it about an hour later at 1 in the morning. So if you're pushing yourself, you're not only getting yourself exhausted, and your body's going to dump more sugar into the blood, but you're also eating more, which is going to dump more sugar into the blood. Now you've got a double whammy. You got stress and food causing your blood sugars to go so high and be not needed that you end up with much more fat storage. So when we find that people are not getting a good sleep at night, you're not getting to bed, I gotta watch CSI, I gotta watch this, and it's like 2 in the morning, and you're bobbing your head, that's your body saying, go to bed. Even if you're lying in bed, closing your eyes, some of you might struggle with sometimes the insomnia. We find insomnia can have an effect on your weight, because if you're not getting a proper sleep, your body's always stressed. As you find on the weekend, you sleep better in the middle of the afternoon, or you find certain times of the day you sleep better and you're able to do it, I'd say have a sleep. Go and sleep. Especially on weekends. Sometimes you might find you do better as an afternoon sleeper. At night you have trouble. Others, if you do a lot of snoring and or you're having a lot of, you wake up in the morning, you're exhausted, you might want to also get checked out for sleep apnea. They have noticed that those who have ended up being on a CPAP machine for sleep apnea, because they hadn't been sleeping well, suddenly they're able to maintain and lose their weight. Whereas they were noticing that they were gaining a lot more weight. And it was because of the exhaustion. The exhaustion releases more stress hormone, which causes the liver to drop more sugar. Your body didn't need it. It goes back to the liver, turns into fat. So you see how your sleep pattern, your sleeping can affect. And that's why sometimes it's not just diet. It's not as simple as diet and exercise, as a lot of the challenges we'll often just focus on. It's a lot more. And you have to look at all these other things. And the things that we find, you've got to take a look at this aspect. And one of the things we find really works is to get yourself a scribbler and start keeping a journal. Write down what you're eating so you have an idea of how much you're eating. You can check it with Canada's Food Guide and see if your portions are about right. And this is just a rough estimate as well. Make sure you're getting all the food groups. Your journal will also, if you're going through a lot of stress, sometimes journaling really helps to release, right? You know, you could be crying in journaling. It's to help release some of that tension. That really helps some people. Some people don't like to do that. That's fine. That's what they like. They're not into it. But for some, they like that. Now, the third thing that they found is humor and laughter. Okay? Humor and laughter is another way to shut down these stress hormones. And that is why the most beautiful humor I have ever seen is in the First Nation communities. And I just love it. I just love it. And it's just an amazing way that humor has been used to help release a lot of the stresses, a lot of the things that go on. And it's just amazing. It's truly a gift. And this is why we never want to lose this. We never want to lose this. Keep that laughing, it's because when you laugh, you release these endorphins again. And that really helps. Those with high blood sugars, it helps to bring down the blood sugars. It helps to stop the release of the liver dumping this sugar. It's so important. Where I'm seeing it's really doing a number is on our teens and our younger group. A lot of our younger kids are into a lot of very stressful games. They're on games like this, okay? It might be, you have to be very, very careful. Games like bingo, if you're losing a lot of money at your bingo and you're stressed at the game, okay, then what can happen, there's nothing wrong with these, but if it's reaching a point that it's stressing you financially, stressing relationships, family, then that's when you need to say, okay, I need to go and get some help for that, because it is stressing my family out. And we're not having the laughter, the fun we used to, okay? When I look at the most well-attended events in any of the communities, they're always, number one, outdoors. They're always where families are together, doing fun things together. It's not one person off doing something. It's when the families are doing things like having a board game night or going out picnicking, going to the beach, going fishing together, or you have your carnivals and your festivals. That's when I see everybody laughing and having so much fun. That is so important for you. It's very important for your family and very important for your community, because that helps them cope also with the stresses that go on. Really important, and it really helps. Those horror flicks, two things that can work against this, that can cause us stress, I'm going to add to this, is fear and horror movies. And we've even checked, we've done blood work on those with diabetes, and we've even checked their blood pressures. And we wanted to see how people that said, oh, I can handle horror flicks. So we watched Friday, I remember us having them watch Friday the 13th and some really terrifying exorcists and stuff. We watched their blood sugars go up by 5 to 7 points. One person went up 10. We watched their blood pressure go up. One person went up almost 35 points on their blood pressure, on their systolic, their upper, just from the horror of what they were watching. What are we allowing the kids to watch? We have teenagers that are too scared to go down the road, to go out in the bush. They think a werewolf or a vampire is going to bite their neck. We got kids that don't want to walk or do anything because they're living now in a whole world of almost a fear of things that it grew up. Yes, there are going to be things that we have to be concerned about. I know there's the dogs. I know there's the bears in the bush and things like this. But we also have to be aware that what they're watching on TV, if that show's upsetting us, that can have an impact. That can cause stress, and that can actually be adding to the problem. So it's like, so there's a lot of little things that we have to look at. But what I wanted to get across is stress is a huge factor. When I see people not as stressed anymore and they're exercising, they're getting a good sleep at night, they're forcing themselves to go to bed at a certain time, maybe an hour earlier than you usually went, things like this, I start to see them feeling better, laughing more, feeling good about themselves. I start to see the changes in them. And it makes a huge factor. And then the other one that is very critical and very important that I see is prayer, meditation. Okay? A very, very important aspect of releasing some of the stresses. It could be anything from memorizing verses to sitting on the edge of a lake, just looking out on the lake, or anchoring your boat and sitting in your boat and getting some peace and quiet, or shutting your bedroom door and just having a quiet time in the house. If there's a lot of noise, a lot of stuff that might be building up. It might be just going for a drive. Some of you I know love to just go for a drive. And it's to get away, to get that quiet time, to even talk to your spouse or your partner. So these are the things that are really important, and that prayer, having things that will help release, take some of your pressures off, take some of your stresses, your worries, is really, really important. But we find that these are the 4 most effective ways of shutting down this stress. So the stress does not create these hormones that are going to start that whole process. And it's so important to take a look at what kind of things that you're dealing with. What are the things that seem to overwhelm you? And sometimes we create our own stress as well. I know for myself, one of the things that can happen is that you'll say, I've got to do this, and then you'll procrastinate. And sometimes you'll wait too long and you go, oh no, now I gotta step later and finish it, and I gotta do this. That's because sometimes we create our own stresses too. Or sometimes we worry about things we don't have to, we have no control over. And it's starting to think, okay, I can't control that. Well, I've got to stop taking on that person's worry, or I have to stop taking that on because it's stressing me and it's actually adding to my health problems. So this is where we need to look at that. And I just wanted to show that this is a critical aspect that I think is impacting a lot of people. And even the blood sugar control for those with diabetes, when I see them handling the stress, and when we're looking at some of these, even the financial, if you're struggling with financial, find out if somebody can come in and help people learn how to do budgeting. Keep track of all your receipts and find out where you're spending your money. Keep track every day where you're spending your money and where you can cut back. It's amazing how things can add up. And I'll show you an example in terms of finances. In some of the communities, you might pay about $2.50 for a pop by just switching to water. Let's say every day you're having one of these bottles of pop. You're looking at, is it $16.50? $17.50. I got to learn my math. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so that's $17.50 in a week, okay? And then you're looking at 52 weeks in a year. If I cut out that pop, in a year I'm saving $910, almost $1,000, that I could put towards a canoe. Get a canoe for the family. You know what I mean? And in the meantime, what you're cutting out is one bottle has 17 teaspoons of sugar. At the end of 1 year, from one bottle a year, 365 days a year, you're cutting out 143 cups of sugar in your diet. That's significant. 143 cups. If you have 1 can every day, per day, times 365 days in a year, this is equal to 77 cups of sugar that you've had. This is equal to close to a 15-pound weight gain if you're not active. So if you're cutting out one of those bottles for $2.50, you're not only saving $1,000, okay, and that's just one of you. If there's 2 or 3 in the family that are having their pops and they've got the cases, look how much sugar they're having. Doesn't give you anything. Not even needed. You could think of all that. Think of what you can make, all the healthy stuff you can buy with that money too. It could be anything from steaks to fresh fruit to fresh vegetables to whatever you need, or it can be put towards a family holiday. So you see, it's very important to take a look at some of those little extras. It's okay to have, if you're going to have that occasionally, it's not going to hurt. But if you're having something every single day and it's starting to add up and cost, maybe that's something you need to find out where your finance is going, how much you're spending. Does it mean you can't go to bingo? No. If you like bingo, it's knowing how much you can have aside for it, if that's something that you like to do. But not to a point where you're worried if there's going to be enough money for food, or it's going to stress you, that you're now going, oh gee, I've got the rest of the month to go. So this is where we have to watch the things that might stress us, that could. If we get cold, if infections and sick, go to bed, have a good rest, drink lots of fluids, go to bed, make sure you take your meds, sleep. Don't try to run the family, and to ask for help. Sometimes asking family member if they could help you because you're really feeling run down, and getting that sleep will help you recover fast. So, so this is an area, I don't know if any of you have any questions about this. This is a second part that I kind of wanted to explain regarding how other things can affect our body, and it can be working against you when you're in your challenge right now. And I really want you to look at this challenge as a challenge to try to make lifelong habit changes, not just I'm here in it for the money. If that comes along with it, great. But if any of you lose a little bit, or you're changing a habit, you don't lose anything, but you've changed a habit from pop to water, and maybe you're even trying to get off cigarettes or whatever you're doing, you're a success. And you can pat yourself on the back, because habits are really hard to change. And that's why sometimes I get frustrated when someone says they come back from the doctor and the doctor just told them to lose 20 pounds and stop smoking and do this and do that. A lot of health staff know it's hard to quit smoking. It's hard to make a change on a habit. And if you can make a change, pick one that you would like to start with and work on that. They often say it takes about 21 days to get through that. The hardest part of quitting a habit that you know that you're struggling with or you've had for years is about 21 days minimum. And if you can get through those 21 days, and that's where you might want to get supports and people that you can call up when you get this craving that you got to go and have this item or whatever, you can call them. And another thing too is I want to let you know is what a lot of people do on these diets, they'll starve themselves from some of their favorite things they do like. And I don't think that necessarily works, because what happens is then one day they take a taste of it and they go crazy. And they go right off the deep end, and they'll have like 2 or 3 chocolate bars, or they'll go on a binge of fast food for days. If it's something like that, I always say plan ahead. I'm planning on Friday night to go and have my hamburger and French fry. So I'm going to plan to maybe walk there, come back. Or maybe I'll park my car a little further. Or you'll plan in your head, okay, I'll have it, but I'll ask them not to put the bacon on it. Or I won't have, or I'll just make it a plain burger and make them smaller. So that way you can plan. If there's certain treat nights, like a pizza night, things like that you have with your family, plan ahead for them. You don't have to make a separate meals of everything. You don't have to do that. It's planning ahead, and sometimes even menu planning is a big thing. So that when you go to that store grocery shopping, everything you see in sight doesn't look good, and you end up with a grocery, you go in there for 2 items, you come out with $150 of stuff. So these are little things that you kind of want to watch.